I would just mention too that Department of Transportation and the Economic Development Administration do partner sometimes, but I would suggest that when you work with EDA that you contact your region EDA office, and there is one here in Chicago, to find out when they will match. They'll actually allow federal dollars to match federal dollars in some cases, not all. The other is in the example that Alan gave, the USDA also will partner with HUD through the block grant program, which is CDAP in Illinois. And so sometimes you see USDA and HUD dollars, HUD flowing through the state dollars layered too. So those two happen sometimes.
And Deborah.
Okay, I'll just add, our experience in the Brownfields program is HUD dollars are their partners, almost all of the projects that we see. We're also seeing, like I mentioned, that the railroad hiking trail in the example. So that's a Department of Interior, the parks. They're very much involved. The redevelopment of the projects at the sites. It's not just industrial, commercial. It's also green space, which can address health and human services, specifically obesity. And so we're seeing now the HHS dollars start to flow in. So.
I would add too that we had a unique experience when we got the first Department of Labor grant, the Community College-Based Job Training Grant. Even though this was a program that the Department of Labor developed specifically for community colleges, they really didn't understand at that time the language that community colleges speak. We're used to being funded from the Department of Education, and so when we wrote the proposal, we used language that made sense to us as educators and would have made sense to the Department of Education. But those of you who've worked with your WIB boards or are a part of it and have Workforce Investment Act funding, that's really where the Department of Labor's orientation was. So we had some trouble when we first received our grant communicating to the Department of Labor what we meant by something called release time, where we're going to take faculty away from their normal duties and give them time to work on a grant. Release time was absolutely new to the program officers that we spoke with. So we felt like part of our role in that grant was to kind of educate the Department of Labor in what it is that we do, and we had to do some, not everything that we intended to do were we able to do because of that language barrier when we wrote the proposal, but in the successive rounds of that particular program competition, we could see that they were starting to communicate with the Department of Education. And the RFPs that came out after the first one that we had were much more user-friendly to us, and I think that they were open to comments and suggestions, and I went to conferences where Department of Ed was there and Department of Labor was there, and they were obviously now communicating with each other. So sometimes it's your role when you receive a grant to help to educate the program officer as to what your needs are and what you meant in that proposal.
Define your terms, something I tell my students, especially when you're working across agencies. One last question, and I think we have to wrap up. And so I said that September is an especially busy time for all of us. It's also the beginning of the election season. And I'm just wondering, many of us are seeking funding from state, federal sources that may change themselves with the whims of politics. When there's a new administration, there's an election season, or there's an election coming up, that may bring changes in the programmatic areas from which we're seeking assistance. What kind of advice would you give to people in terms of being able to weather a sort of uncertain, if that's a nice way of putting it, uncertain political environment? How do we deal with political risk?
I have a really good example of that, and that is, first of all, don't give up on your projects, because sometimes all you have to do is change your language, as we just heard. A perfect example is a trail segment that we've been trying to fund for about 5 years in the Quad City area between two small communities, and we were funding it through traditional and what is called enhancement sources through the Department of Transportation. And then the language of safe routes to schools came out. Well, it just happens that the high school for both communities is located in one community, so if this trail were built, it does mean that the children are going to be able to get to junior high and high school through a safe route without having to travel in a vehicle. So we were able to use safe routes to schools information or language. Then we are now hearing about obesity that was just mentioned. Well, getting kids out of cars and into either on their feet or on bikes means that then they're likely to be more active and less obese. So we're actually adding that language to all of our grant applications. So try to see if you can morph your project and your project language to what frankly, the word of the day is, because that's what happens all the time. And by the way, all of that is livability, and that's the word of the day now, and we're going to be adding livability to the grant application that I'm writing that's due in 2 weeks.
Great.
Yeah, I think the word of the day is very well taken. I think that's one of the things that in our state planning that we are often subjected to is the word of the day from the federal government is blank, and that's what we plan for. However, I do think that a lot of the funding sources that are out there are fairly apolitical. HUD's been funded for years and funding different programs for years that have the same application standards from administration to administration. So one thing to look at, I think, is that on a local level and on a regional level, the politics play a fairly big role in deciding what the focus is going to be and what kind of dollars are going to be sought out. I've been working with a community in the Metro East region for years now, and about a year ago, the mayor lost an election and was replaced by a mayor who has no interest in working with us anymore. So all of our efforts just sort of dried up. That's one of the pitfalls I see with politics. But understand that the dollars are apolitical, and driving forward with them, having a strong backbone and knowing what you want to do, and knowing what kind of development you're looking to do, or what kind of resources you're looking to bring to your community. Know that the funding's out there, and just be